in just a moment. All right. So for today's event, we're going to be focusing on learning more about peritoneal and home dialysis. And for those of you who are not aware, the ESRD Network is a nonprofit organization in Texas, and we provide services on behalf of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And our main mission has always been to just support quality patient and family-centered dialysis and care. So we do a bunch of different quality improvement initiatives and projects to help focus on that. And in today's event, we're going to be having a couple of our home dialysis heroes present and talk to you more about their experience with home dialysis and some of their perspectives. So what is a home dialysis hero? Some of you guys might be wondering. Basically, it's just a dialysis patient who performs their treatments at home. They could be a home hemo patient or a peritoneal dialysis patient, and they're just familiar with the process, the ups and downs, and they could serve as a peer mentor for other patients who are either currently home patients or maybe thinking about becoming a home dialysis patient. And for today's call, we're going to be having Dr. Gooden present. She's actually one of our medical review board members, and she's an awesome abdominal transplant surgeon currently at the Medical City of Dallas. And in addition to transplant surgery, she does some dialysis access surgeries and other general surgeries. She's had a long history in the medical field. She was previously a surgical director at the kidney transplant program. And she was also a director of quality for the transplant programs in St. Luke's. So she's had a long-standing history with quality of transplant care, and she's going to have a lot of good insight for you guys about dialysis, home dialysis access surgeries. Also on today's call, we've got Sam and Lacye Trevino. They're our home dialysis heroes from our patient advisory committee. And Sam is a former dialysis patient of 17 years. He's also a transplant recipient and a motivational speaker. Lacye is his lovely wife, and she's also his care partner, his kidney donor, and she's also a motivational speaker. Oh yes, and most importantly, she's Sam's true superhero. So, and they've always had an upbeat attitude and humor, and they also developed the Urine Inspiration, which is a presentation aimed at educating everyone about living a full life while facing medical challenges. And in today's event, we do have a question for all of you that are joining and all of your patients. What is holding you back from starting peritoneal or home dialysis? So please let us know in the chat, as well as if you have any other questions throughout this presentation, just let us know in the chat so we can get to them. And for today's discussion topics, we're going to be discussing the surgical aspects of home and peritoneal dialysis access, self-care with dialysis, and a care partner's perspective. And here, give me just a moment. I'll go ahead and pass the ball to Dr. Gooden so she can tell us a little bit more about the surgical aspects of home dialysis.
All right.
Hey, Dr.
Hello.
Hello. Are you on? We can hear you now. Give me just a moment and let me pass you the ball so you can show the slides.
Okay, sounds good. And as she's doing that, all throughout my transplant training and general surgery training, I learned that dialysis access leads good dialysis access leads to good dialysis, which means better patient care and gives patients a better chance at transplant. So that even though my major job is transplant surgery, dialysis access is a love of mine. So I'm always excited to talk about dialysis access and the various aspects of that. So let me get to my little PowerPoint slide. And I have a lot of pictures because I'm a surgeon and we like pictures. So it won't be anything to gross you out, but I think it helps to show exactly what it is we do. So we're going to start with peritoneal dialysis. So let's start with PD and pictures. So PD, the way it is supposed to work is basically we place the tube within the abdomen. This does not require anything to do with blood. There's fluid that goes in that has the good stuff. And the peritoneum is what we call a membrane, which is the fancy term for it can exchange good for bad. And then the bad fluid gets pumped out. So your body takes the good out of the fluid and leaves the bad, and the bad gets pumped out. Laparoscopically, if a patient is laying flat, the curlicue part is in the pelvis, and then there's a part that goes into the muscle and then out of the skin. And then if you look at this picture, this is the belly button. That's a little incision where a catheter was sort of tunneled. And then you can see where the catheter comes out. And then this is what it looks like to do PD in the privacy of your home, sitting in your bed. So I want to talk about some surgical myths because I think it's super important to bust those myths. Things I've heard from patients. Well, I've had abdominal surgery, C-section, transplant, a big incision. I can't do PD. The concern for a lot of people is scar tissue. But the truth is you can't predict how much scar tissue people actually have. I actually did 2 PD catheter placements last week. One was in a patient who had his colon removed and then put back together. And it was years ago. So you would think he would have lots of scar tissue. He did not in the place that it mattered. His case was super easy. I had another patient who had a C-section, not your traditional C-section, but one where it goes up towards the belly button. She actually had a lot of scar tissue, but again, it was not in the place where I need to place the catheter, so it didn't bother me. Some people ask about, what about an ostomy? It is still possible to do PD with an ostomy. So sometimes these myths have some truth. Sometimes I get in there and I can't place it, but I don't know until I try. Myth 2 is, okay, I have a hernia, so I can't do PD. That's also not true. In particular, patients who have small hernias can do PD. Sometimes I can repair it at the time of the operation when I place the catheter. Now, if you have a larger hernia, that should be fixed before trying to start PD. And then sometimes hernias can happen after peritoneal dialysis. And again, this can be repaired and PD restarted. Another surgical myth, PD doesn't work well for obese or very muscular patients. And that's also not true. Heavier patients do extremely well on PD. We just have to watch how we place it so we can decrease the risk of infections. Bottom line is, my grandma used to say, nothing beats a can't but a try. If you're interested in PD, it's a very simple procedure in terms of the fact that it usually takes me less than 30 minutes to do the surgery. And if I have to take it out for any reason, it's a 5-minute procedure to take it out. But that 30 minutes to place it in could be a significant change to your lifestyle. So the good and the bad, the pros, you have less infections. Again, we're not dealing with blood here. We're dealing with fluid in the abdomen around the intestines. So patients tend to have less infections. You don't have the vein issues that people get when they've had dialysis for a long time through one of their fistulas. If it's successful, patients do have better quality of life. A lot of my patients continue to work and really enjoy being on PD and not having to be tethered to inpatient dialysis. And it also tends to be a more gentle dialysis. Patients don't tend to have the cramping that people discuss. You also have some of the dietary restrictions lifted. Some of the cons, it does not work for everyone. There are times I can place a perfectly working PD catheter and it just the body doesn't want to absorb the good stuff well. And I can't predict that. So we don't know if it will work until I put it in. There's this fancy word on here called sclerosing peritonitis, and that just really means a bad infection. Sometimes people can get a really bad infection, which can cause peritoneal dialysis to no longer be an option. That is also extremely rare. I've dealt with, I believe, 2 patients out of the past 10, 11 years of doing this, longer than that actually. And PD can stop working over time. I do have patients who've been on PD for 20 years and had to switch. But it's one of those things where, again, you don't know until you try. So let's talk about home hemo. Home hemo, I think the most important thing to know about home hemo is that where your access is placed it does matter. In particular, if you're planning on doing what we call self-cannulation, which is sticking your own self, I find these are the easier ways to do it. If you have the wrist fistula, if you have the fistula on the upper arm, in particular in the middle of the arm, if you have a graft, that's sort of a loop in the upper arm or the forearm, and a sort of the C curve or an arch that's in the upper arm, those are a little bit easier to access for self-cannulation. So best techniques, I go over this because if you're going to take over and do home hemo, you and your care partner need to know how to do this right. Just like in dialysis, you will need 2 needles. One to take the blood out and get it clean through the machine, and one, the venous portion, to give the blood back, the good blood back. There's 2 really good ways to do this. Either what we call rope ladder or going up and down the access so that you don't have any of those ugly lumps and bumps that you see people talking about. Or what we call a buttonhole, where there are 2 to 3 holes that are created specifically to be used the same time over and over again with not a sharp needle, but a blunt needle to allow the access to be accessed easily. As with everything, there's a good and the bad. The good, again, better quality of life. You're more in control. This also has more gentle dialysis. There is potential for less infections because, let's face it, I find that my patients who are at home do a phenomenal job of taking care of themselves. Sometimes in the clinic, you're subject to whoever happens to be there. Sometimes the training is different. Nobody's going to take care of you as good as you can. So you're in charge, and that's a pro. Some of the cons, you got to get comfortable with needles, or your care partner does. There is significant training time, but that makes sense. Nobody wants you to stick yourself once and go, okay, perfect, go home. You want to make sure you're fully trained on everything so that way once you're home, you're super comfortable. There is preparation that has to be done at home to make sure you have everything set up and straight. And I think another con is you are in charge. So there's nobody to blame. If something goes wrong, you can't say, well, they didn't do this right. Nope, you were in charge. And so you have to be comfortable with being in charge. The last thing I wanted to say is that personally for me, I love home dialysis patients. When I see a patient that is at home, I know that they tend to be great candidates for transplant. Why? Because if you can manage dialysis at home, you're likely going to be extremely compliant with your medication regimen, and there tends to be less social concerns. If you can manage dialysis at home, you're pretty much a rock star in my eyes. And I know that you'll be a rock star when you get your kidney and take fantastic care of it. That's the expectation. And I will pass it back.
Awesome. That was a great presentation and very informative. Thank you so much, Dr. Gooden. Let's see. I see we did get a few questions for you, but we can address those at the end. Let me see if I can get my slides up here. Awesome. So that gave everyone just a little bit more insight on the different kinds of dialysis access you can have for home dialysis. And now we're going to be having Sam and Lacye, our home dialysis heroes, give us a little bit more information from their perspective on self-care and being a care partner. Sam and Lacye, are you all there?
Yes. Can you see us and hear us?
Let's see. Yes, we can hear you and we can see you.
Excellent. Excellent. And thank you, Dr. Gooden. That was an excellent
That was perfect. That's
presentation.
almost, I mean, aside from being a doctor, much of what we talk about with the benefits of home dialysis and becoming a great transplant candidate.
You're a doctor?
No, her.
Oh, right. Okay.
I am not.
Don't be afraid to laugh, guys. We're a lot of fun to hang out with. So, you know, Lacye and I met in high school. We're, you know, teenagers, started dating, and everything was going great. I graduated high school, went into college, and my freshman year of college, I became sick, showing the signs and symptoms of kidney failure at 19. And I had to go to the doctor, take a simple urine sample and blood sample, and found out that my kidneys had failed and that I had to go on in-center hemodialysis or slip into a coma because I had an 18 hematocrit.
Right. And Sam and I had been dating about a year and a half. When he delivered this news, I knew that he wasn't well. He came back and said he had to start dialysis. While I knew what the kidneys did, I had no idea what dialysis was or what that entailed. And I went to my mom, and she honestly gave me the best and worst advice. She said, Lacey, I don't think you should stay with him because he's sick. I said, okay. And then she followed that with, but I don't think you should leave him because he's sick. Thanks, Mom. That didn't help at all. But I realized at that moment that had this disease not entered our lives, there would be no reason for us to break up. So I went back to Sam and said, okay, I'll start this journey with you, but I don't know anything about dialysis. If I'm going to do this, I need to learn everything about dialysis.
And so I had a left arm fistula placed, and we only waited 4 weeks for it to mature. And in 1993, some of you probably weren't born yet. In 1993, I walked into my very first in-center treatment with Lacey by my side. And empowerment started right then on day one. The first thing that happened was that in-center staff built a relationship. They empowered us from the beginning. Every person in that clinic did their job as if their own lives depended on it. We had technicians teaching me how to self-cannulate within the first 3 months. I had technicians that turned the machine towards me and narrated everything they did as they were touching my machine. I had dietitians coming in telling us about diet and how to create gentle substitutions in our diet for foods that might be higher in potassium or phosphorus. We had nurses teaching us how to navigate between treatments, especially how to treat ourselves, how to treat myself, to not put on too much fluid weight and not too much salt and things like that. And so this team was so awesome and
instrumental.
They were instrumental in teaching us every part of dialysis from each team member's point of view.
Something that I was incredibly grateful for was the empowerment and the education, excuse me, because day one, I walk into a clinic, I knew nothing. I see all these patients with lines running everywhere. I hear alarms going off. I was scared, but because of the empowerment and education, I slowly became more confident, and our team was almost instrumental, or they were instrumental, but they were almost insistent on the fact that we would become self-care. We would remain in center for 7 years. And during that time, we learned how to live on in-center dialysis. We were married, we earned our degrees, Sam played college soccer, and after 7 years, we became what they considered self-care. We were, because of everything that they taught us, running all of our treatments, taking blood pressure, temperatures, stringing the machine, building the machine, running the treatment, everything.
Yeah, and it was awesome. As far as the, how we became empowered, we asked questions, a lot of questions. Anybody that came near us, we had a question for, not to be annoying or anything, but look, this was my disease. This was my blood.
Your treatment.
That was my machine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we approached it. And people were so respectful and so caring that they were there to spend the time with us, to teach us everything. And so we would, be in center for 7 years. And we were to the point where we could run every aspect of the treatment. And we decided one day that here it comes this home therapy nurse while we were on treatment. And she walks in and says, you guys are doing this all by yourself. What do you think about home therapies?
Yes, please.
And just like that, before I could open my mouth, Lacey had signed us up for home therapies and, home hemo training actually. And it was awesome because this is a unique story because often, we as patient care advocates, we go into a clinic and we educate a patient and they become very excited and they run home to tell their loved one, hey, I want to do this. And the loved one says no out of fear.
And I can understand that. I'll paint a quick picture for you. Let's say it's a Monday and I bring my loved one into the clinic. He already feels bad. He skipped 2 days over the weekend. We sit in the lobby. That what I call the trap door opens to the floor, the dialysis floor, and a PCT or a nurse says, Mr. Trevino, your chair's ready. He goes back, that door shuts. As a care partner, I'm either sitting in the lobby or I leave and come back. 4.5 hours later, that door opens. My loved one returns and exhibits the symptoms of what we call the dialysis hangover. Exhaustion, cramping, starts bleeding, might pass out, low blood pressure, many different symptoms. And then one day somebody approaches both of us and says, hey, guess what? You can do this at home. As a care partner, no, I'm terrified. But because of my education and empowerment from day one, I was confident. So when we were presented with that option, I said yes first. But now our care partners don't have that education and empowerment. And so I'd really like to see them be pulled back into the equation.
We need to think outside of the box when it comes to educating our care partners. We know because of the virus that it's not safe for them to be in the clinics. So we need to think of a way to reach out to our care partners, whether by email, letter,
Zoom meetings,
something like that. So maybe we can put our heads together and figure out a way to further educate and empower our care partners as well.
And create a team between the patient and the care partner as we were a team. And so we did everything together.
Yeah. So once we would start dialysis at home, we stayed at home for 10 years. And the benefits of that were, well, one, more frequent dialysis really benefited us. We went from 3 days a week at 4.5 hours to 5 days a week, 2.5 hour treatments.
And that's like dinner and a movie, honestly. Like we were so used to 3 days a week, 4.5 hours, which is really hard on a patient and not incredibly healthy for dialysis patients. But more frequent dialysis made Sam feel so much better that dialysis hangover essentially went away. He had more energy. His recovery time went to almost nothing. His blood pressure stabilized. It was amazing.
Yep. And I did become the perfect transplant candidate. Not only did I feel better, but there was a transplant team out there that looked at us as perfect candidates. You're taking care of yourself. You're sticking to the regimen.
Right.
And we have a lot of patients in center that say this every day. They say, I'm already on the transplant list, so I'm just going to stay in center. My friends, that is a huge red flag. That is an opportunity to say, you know what? When you are called for that transplant, there is less than a 50% chance that you are freshly dialyzed. And when they draw your labs, which is the first thing that they do when you arrive at the hospital, they're going to check your potassium. And if your potassium is not in range, they're going to say goodbye to that kidney transplant.
And like the good doctor said, your home patients are rock stars. They're already following their prescription and their regimen, which means they're going to take care of that kidney. That makes them a better candidate for a transplant.
Yeah. And I think back to her, Dr. Gooden's advice about self-cannulation. I had the same fistula for 17 years. And that I attribute that to it being because I was a self-cannulator from the first 3 months and then went 16 years and 9 more months with the same fistula. So these are all good talking points. Hopefully we have nailed, most of the questions. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Supporting your care partner, something I think you have to have great communication. Obviously, we've been together almost 30 years, married 20. So, obviously you're going to have some communication issues just as a married couple, but especially when you're presented with medical issues, long-term dialysis, transplantation, you have to be able to communicate very well and be able to be open and honest. And when you're frustrated, it's okay to be frustrated, but you need to be able to talk through it. Support groups are great. They really weren't around when we were going through this, as far as I know, but I fully support them. And I'm here to talk with our care partners, anybody who's interested in transplantation. It can be scary, but it can be amazing. And I couldn't be more thankful and blessed to have had this opportunity.
So quick ending to this story. Lacye and I were tested to, for me to have a transplant, her be my donor. And against all odds, less than a 9% chance, we were a match. And we had a successful transplant almost
11 years ago.
11 years ago, and we're still going dialysis free. And we're just here for you. We want the best for all of you. If you ever have a question, we are always available, and we wish the best. So God bless.
And thank you for having us. I know we don't have a whole lot of time. We have a whole lot of silly, fun stories and jokes to share, but we'll keep it short. And we really appreciate all of you for doing everything that you do for people like us.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sam and Lacye. It was really inspiring. It's always inspiring to hear your story. It's very cute to see how your journey and how you've come such a long way. And I know you guys have a lot of insight just on the in-center side, even on the home dialysis side, and even transplant. So, and thank you so much for offering other patients and listeners, if they need any advice, that you're here to give them that. So we did get a lot of questions, which we want to get into. But before we get into that, we just want to remind everyone to visit the ESRD Network's patient portal. We continue to post the newest resources and videos about all the important healthcare topics and questions you could think of. We recently added some new pages for you all, just about selecting a dialysis facility, to tell you more about telemedicine. So you can always visit that on our website, www.esrdnetwork.org/patient portal. And we also want to let you all on the phone know, this is a great chance for you to become a home dialysis hero, or if you have any patients that you could think of that would, either need a mentor like Sam and Lacye that could talk to them, or that they would be a great peer mentor, just let us know, and we'd love to get connected with them so we can make this a more interactive opportunity. And of course, we've got our contact information here. But let's go ahead and take a look at the chat, see if we've got any questions. Let's see. I do see a question in the chat we do have from Mary to Dr. Gooden. Do patients tend to feel better after home dialysis treatment versus in-center? I think you might be muted, Dr. Gooden.
Yes. Okay, that better?
Yes.
Okay. So, this is what I tell my patients. You have to remember that a kidney's job is to filter the poisons out of your system every second of every hour of every day. When you do dialysis, in particular in-center dialysis, instead of every second of every hour every day, you're squeezing 2.5, 3 days into 3 to 5 hours, depending on your prescription. So no wonder you feel like crap, right? It makes sense. The difference between home dialysis, whether it's peritoneal or home hemo, is that you're actually able to spread out how often you're getting those poisons filtered. So it makes sense that you don't feel as bad. It's getting your poisons filtered out every day or 5 days a week, as opposed to slamming it all into a short little period of time, trying to clear out everything you've done. You also have to remember that, if you had a fun weekend and you had a little bit more fluid than you were supposed to, or you ate a little bit, Super Bowl, you ate hot wings or whatever, right? You're going to pay for it when you come to dialysis that Monday or that Tuesday, because there's a lot more poisons they have to clean, a lot more fluid they have to clean. So I have patients who are home dialysis or peritoneal, and okay, I know I'm going to be bad this weekend. I'm just going to make sure I adjust my dialysis at home. And I won't feel it as much. When you're in center, they're not worried about your comfort, to be honest. It's, I've got this many people to do. I need you to get on and get off. And we need to get this going. That's the difference.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so with home dialysis, patients are a lot more able to have that freedom to just, make it fit their lifestyle and what they're going to do.
Yes.
Okay. And we've got another question here for you, Dr. Gooden. So what if my nephrologist will not talk to me about becoming a home patient? They just tell me that they don't want me to go to that type of modality, not necessarily saying they're not a candidate, but that the patient just wouldn't like home dialysis.
So that's their opinion. Let me just say this. You and your physician should be partners. I think that's the best patient-physician relationship. We should be partners in your care. I need to use my medical knowledge to talk to you about what I know from what I see. And I need to listen to what you're telling me about your body because you've lived in it for longer than I have. Do I have nephrologists, for instance, who weren't necessarily trained on PD and therefore aren't very comfortable prescribing it? Yes. But if you're in a DaVita or a Fresenius, there are advocates out there for you to talk to. A physician should not be able to prevent you from exploring that option. And I say this because I've advocated for patients who were never told about home dialysis modalities. I talked to them about it, and then they were like, "Oh, wow, I want to know about that." So then they go to their clinic and things like that. Now, for home and for PD, there is evaluation that you have to go through in order to be approved. That is not necessarily through your nephrologist. That's through the group that is figuring out, do you have what you need to be at home? Now, they can tell me no, right? If they say no, you don't have, it's not, clean enough, or there's not enough space, or the plumbing's not going to work, or whatever it happens to be, then no, we can't do home. But just because your nephrologist says, I don't think you'll like home, that doesn't mean they can prevent you from getting evaluated if that's what you want to do.
Okay, that's great to hear. And then we also have a question here. I guess you mentioned the Super Bowl. So is a patient's diet more flexible when you do home dialysis?
Yes, it is. You have to be cognizant of your numbers. I think Sam and Lacye can talk a little bit more about that because they're the ones who actually lived it. But absolutely, because and I will tell you too that the studies have shown that both with PD and with hemo, your numbers are better. So like your phosphorus is better, your potassium tends to be better. So those numbers that we look at that tell us what you can and cannot eat, they tend to be more regulated when you're on home hemo. Sam, Lacye, you want to talk about diet a little bit?
Sure, definitely. Something I tell people is that doesn't mean, having a less restricted diet doesn't mean you're free to run crazy. That's
Right.
something that some people will do. They're like, you said I could have a whole pizza.
No.
You could have an extra piece of pizza, but it comes down to discipline and communication. It's nice to have those lists of things that you can have, that you might want to be careful, and what you probably shouldn't have,
Right.
And keep track of those things. I'd say write them down.
Well, and when you transition, I remember transitioning from in-center to home, we noticed, the numbers were great. So it was exciting, because we love queso, right? So that was something that he had to limit. But then all the numbers were saying, you can have queso. And then we might have had a little bit too much queso. And so you have to monitor those numbers and realize, yes, you can indulge a little bit more, which is nice. You have fewer restrictions, but you still have to be aware of what is the right balance. However, just having not only the freedom in diet restrictions, but the freedom in your schedule, we had a much more vibrant social life. We could wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, dialyze for 2 hours, have the rest of the day, and then, go to sleep, do it again. And you feel like you have more time to do more of what you want, whether it's socializing, working, hanging out with family, whatever is more important to you. But with the dietary restrictions, even liquid, you could have more liquid, whatever it was. You didn't have to limit it so much as long as your treatments were in line with your diet and your intake.
And the cool thing with the fluid restriction was if I did have let's say a
Super Bowl weekend.
A Super Bowl weekend, well, I could dialyze early, or actually I dialyzed during Super Bowl and then woke up on Monday morning and dialyzed Monday morning, just trying to
maintain.
Trying to, make up for what I did
with all that ice cold water.
Yes.
Yeah.
So but that helped. I mean, it was helpful.
Okay, awesome. And then since you're kind of talking about being at home and dialyzing during the Super Bowl, can you guys speak to some of the benefits of doing home or PD treatment during the pandemic?
Oh, wow.
Well, we haven't, Sam's been transplanted for almost 11 years. However, that's something that is very important to us, understanding that patients are scared to go in center because now you're trying to self-isolate, but you are required to be surrounded by other people, and you don't know how well they are self-isolating. So I think home therapies, whichever modality you choose, is even more important right now and makes people feel more safe if they know that they don't have to leave their home to receive their treatments.
Right. And, like Lacey was saying, we weren't in center during COVID or anything, but what about flu season?
Exactly.
Just flu season alone. I remember walking into a center and seeing one or two people sick. And within the end of the week, several of us were sick. And,
you're stuck in a room together for 4.5, 5 hours, depending on
touching everything, touching scales, touching water fountains, doors. And so you're definitely safer at home if you take the right precautions.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. My patients who are on PD and home hemo during the pandemic have really enjoyed the peace of mind.
Yes.
Definitely. And it looks like we do have another question for you, Dr. Gooden. Are you using telemedicine because of the pandemic? And how does that work?
So for transplant patients, so when I do when the pandemic was really at its earliest and we didn't have the PPE, we were doing for the eval. So an eval is when, let me just say this. If you are on dialysis, that does not mean you are on the list. You have to be evaluated by a transplant program. So do not believe the myth that, oh, I'm on dialysis, I'm listed somewhere. If you haven't gone to a transplant program, gone through the whole process, you get a letter that says, congratulations, you're on the list. Here's what you need to do next. Then you're not on the list. So when we were doing initial evals, we were doing that in the, we were doing telemedicine. For my access patients, I had to stop clinic for a little bit because I cannot do access assessments from telemedicine. Because in particular for when I do a fistula or a graft, I have to feel it. I have to listen to it. I have to check it. Myself and my access coordinator. So we had to make sure we had enough PPE and we have our clinic set up so we can see people without having a lot of people in the wait room and things like that. So we've made a lot of changes. I'm also, especially right now, I'm vaccinated. And I'm 2 weeks out from my vaccination. So I'm feeling a little bit like Wonder Woman, like I'm a little bit invincible right now. So and everybody in my clinic is as well. So we are feel safe to see patients and have been practicing just cleanliness and things like that. So earlier on, when we didn't have PPE and we didn't have great access to vaccinations and all that good stuff, yes, for transplant we were doing televisits as necessary. But at this point, we're basically seeing every patient that we need to see and assess in clinic. We just have changed the clinic around so that way people aren't herded up upon each other, and we don't have that risk of transmission.
Awesome. And that's great to hear that you got vaccinated. Would you care to tell us a little bit about your experience since you mentioned it?
Yeah, I got the Pfizer. I got 2 shots. The first shot, my arm hurt. The second shot, I didn't feel anything unless I like pressed on my arm. I was like, does it hurt? And so I didn't have any complications, any issues. And I will tell you that I have somebody close to me who recently developed COVID-19. They're doing fine. And I was around, but I don't even have to quarantine or anything. So I checked in with my infectious disease doctor, and I'm not, not sick, not nothing. So it's a good feeling. I know that I at least have 8 months of immunity. That's all we know right now. But I've seen way too much. I've had transplant patients unfortunately die after having a beautiful transplant. They get COVID and they die. I have patients who weren't on dialysis. Now they're on dialysis. One of my coworkers was a surgeon, got COVID, was in the ICU. Now he has diabetes. Now he had to bring a partner on because he can't work as long as he used to because he still can't breathe. So I didn't want any of those things. So as soon as they said vaccination, and in particular, because I take care of immunosuppressed patients and dialysis patients, I was always afraid that I would bring something to them. And my patients are the ones that when they get it, they don't do well. So, it was weighing the risks and the benefits and reading and all the science and the data. I'd rather get the vaccine than get that disease.
Awesome. Yes. So you said you've got 8 more months of for sure immunity.
That's all we know right now, because that's how the studies have the time for it. It hasn't been like years and years.
Right.
But at least I know I've got 8 months. I'll take it.
Okay. Awesome. And it looks like we do have another question for you here. Earlier you mentioned that PD catheters sometimes just stop working. What are my options at that point? Would I have to go back to in-center, or can I get a different access?
So you can do home hemo, you can do in-center hemo, you would go back to hemodialysis. I often will, let's say I have a patient who comes in and they're just starting and they're interested in PD and they're not sure about a fistula. We will talk about their options, and some patients will have me place the PD catheter, but also have me place like a backup fistula. That way, if something ever happens to their PD, because it's your own, when I say fistula, a fistula is just a fancy term for my own tissue, no plastic, no nothing. It's basically like a super vein, right? If you can imagine, if you're doing dialysis, you can't do it like through like what they do for a little IV, right? So I have to make you a super vein, a bigger vein that can be used for dialysis. So some patients will want me to place a fistula just to have it for backup. So let's say if 5 years from now something happens with their catheter or their PD catheter, or let's say they have an infection and they want to hold off on using the PD catheter for now, they don't have to get that thing in their neck. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but what we call in the business is the white stick of death. So I try to avoid that thing as much as possible. So if PD is working and it's been working great, and then after a while the peritoneum or the membrane just kind of doesn't do the job like it should, you can go back to hemodialysis, and you can choose whether you want to do home or in center.
Okay, awesome. And Lacey, we've got a great question for you here. Just for being a care partner, how were you able to manage your time aside from assisting Sam with his treatments?
Truthfully, it boils down to communication. So I would know his dialysis schedule at home based on we both worked full time. So I would know when we would typically dialyze. If I had plans with friends or I wanted to go to a workout class or whatever, oftentimes we'd be able to talk about our schedule and work it around the dialysis schedule. But especially when he was dialyzing at home with more frequent dialysis with shorter treatments, it was much easier because I didn't have to be in center with him. Not that I had to be in center, but I wanted to be, You know, he had a great care team. However, I wanted to be there as much as I could. However, dialyzing at home, I wanted to be there obviously more often, but they were shorter treatments. And I knew that we were either going to do it early in the morning or later at night. And so we had basically our own schedules during the day where he was a full-time teacher and a coach. I had a full-time job. I'd go to the store or whatever. So we kind of knew when we were going to dialyze. So I could make my own schedule during that time in between treatments.
Yeah, and sometimes we would just like look at each other and go, "Hey, you want to dialyze real quick?" Yeah, let's knock that out of the way. And we had the opportunity to do that.
Especially on the weekends, you know, if we realized we didn't really have anything planned and we were just kind of chilling on the couch watching something, like, hey, we got like 3 hours, you want to knock out dialysis real quick? Sure. You know, and so we would. And we had the opportunity with on-demand dialysis being able to work that around our schedules. So it really honestly boiled down to communication, discussing schedules, knowing what we each had going on in our lives. Sometimes you run into conflicts. There were times when I would have a friend come over if I couldn't be there and I wanted someone to be with Sam. He would fight me on it. He's like, I can do this by myself, but I was like, nope. And so, you know,
we didn't have that back then.
I know, we weren't supposed to do solo back then. But we'd have a friend come and hang out, because we had friends hang out with us when we dialyzed all the time. You know, they would say, hey, what are you doing tonight? Oh, we got to dialyze. You want to come over? Sure. So they just come over and hang out. We'd watch a movie or we'd listen to music or whatever, you know. Play games. It was a non-issue. So we started changing the perspective of dialysis. It wasn't secret or removed, you know. So we would have friends come over and just hang out with us while we dialyzed, because again, our treatments were 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes, you know, and some of them were scared of needles and they would just walk outside, you know, when the needle situation was happening. But otherwise, it really just became part of our lives. It was a non-issue for us.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning that. I know a lot of times patients who are considering going to home, that's something they mentioned. They don't want to kind of be a burden on their care partner. They don't want to take up too much of their time. But from what you're saying, it seems like, you know, it gave you a lot more free time and you felt a lot less isolated because it was kind of a normal thing you could do at home when you're watching TV, having friends over.
Yeah, so and one thing I would like to add real quickly is many times people talk about caregivers. There have been times I've had to be a caregiver. You know, we've been through a lot in a long time. But truthfully, with home dialysis, I was a care partner. It wasn't a burden for me. I mean, we shared building the machine and the treatments. So that's something that's very important to me, is to change that perception. He wasn't a burden. Like, as a dialysis patient, he could do most of everything he needed by himself. Every now and then he couldn't reach the remote, or he forgot Cheetos, or, you know, like it was really more of a care partner as it was a caregiver, which I've been a caregiver before. So there's a distinct difference.
Nicely put.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. And we do have another question for Dr. Gooden. So what do you think are some of the biggest barriers you've seen in this field, and what are some of the solutions to those barriers?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest barriers is education. I think when you're in the hospital and you're sick, people throw that white stick of death on you and send you out, and they put you in the clinic, and then they send you to me, and they're like, you need something to get that thing out your chest. And that's all they talk about. That's all they know. So one of the solutions I have found is education. So in my clinic, I have allotted like 30, 45 minutes of just sitting down and saying, have we discussed your options? Because you don't have to do just this. You don't have to do just this. Has anybody talked to you about PD? And then I'll bring up, my staff laughs at me because I have like, I'll bring up the PD catheter and I'll show it, and I'll show them the catheter that's in their chest. I'm like, did you know it was this long? So we can sit there and discuss what their options are. And then the other thing that I try to make patients understand is you can make a choice today and change your mind 6 months from now. Like, just because you decide, okay, I'm going to do hemo for now, I at least have put in your mind considering home or considering peritoneal. So that way, if you decide, I don't want to do this anymore, you know you're not locked in. The other thing I do is I try to educate the clinics. A lot of your hemodialysis clinics don't know anything about peritoneal dialysis and don't really know a lot about home. So our access, I'm the director of the North Texas Dialysis Access Clinic. And so myself and my access coordinator, Diane, who's been a dialysis nurse for over 20 years and is an expert cannulator, we'll go out and we'll do cannulation camps to different clinics. And during that cannulation camp, because we were trying to teach good technique to the techs so that we have less complications with our access, we also discuss PD and what it means. And if just in case they ask, if a patient asks, I don't want my text to go, I don't know, you have to check with person. You can say, oh, well, this is what I learned really quickly. So it becomes less of a fear thing. So I think education is big on both sides, because I just feel like I always feel so bad that first visit with my patients who just got out of the hospital with that thing in their neck, and they're so defeated and they feel like this, everything's just being thrown at them. And it's my job to say, no, you have choices. So let's talk about your choices. And in particular, has anybody talked to you about transplant? Because you don't have to do this forever. And so it's just amazing the number of patients who've never been talked to about PD, who've never been talked to about transplant. And I'm not talking about just fresh patients. I'm talking about patients who've been out for a couple of years and maybe they're coming to me to fix something. And I'm like, you know, why are you on dialysis for 3 years and you're not on a transplant list? What's going on with you? What's happening? And I think just having that time to take that education and really, really focus on saying to the patient, you have a choice. This is your life. You have a say in what happens to you, gives them the empowerment to make them feel like this is not just happening to me. I can participate in my life.
Oh, Dr. King, I could not agree with you more. I love you so much. I wish we had more doctors like you that are empowering their patients. And I don't mean to cut anybody off, but I'm just sitting here like nodding along going, yes, yes. We've dealt with so many doctors and nephrologists that don't have your perspective, and we need so many more of you and what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Keep preaching.
Yes. Serious.
Thanks.
Yes, and we definitely agree to that as well. So we do have a couple more questions here, but just to end things off, since we're coming up on our time, if there are patients that are coming up with some staff that aren't as involved as the staff that Sam and Lacye came into, or maybe a nephrologist who's not so into PD or home hemo, what advice would you have for them to kind of take that next step upon themselves to learn more, maybe get the education? Do you guys have any advice?
Man, you know, there are so many credible social media, you know, channels out there. They're
Credible is the key.
You know, yeah, credible, you know, and people can always call us. I mean, constantly. We're always open. We'll always answer. And, but, you know, ask questions. If you don't like the answer, keep asking. Ask somebody else.
Ask somebody else.
Yeah. And that's my best advice. But keep keep being your best advocate.
Yeah. And call Dr. Gooden because she'll answer your questions.
I will also say the patient portal on ESRD network is really, really good. This is made for the patients by the patients, and there's a lot of good information on there. Every major dialysis conglomerate, like I said, DaVita, Fresenius, et cetera, they have places to call if you have questions and things like that. Just like if people want to switch clinics, there's ways to do that. You're not ever stuck anywhere. So ESRD network is made to help with these things. And so going to the patient portal, that's a credible site because they'll give you other resources and give you resources to people like Sam and Lacye, et cetera. So you can say, okay, my clinic's not helping me, but I guarantee you that every dialysis clinic has a peritoneal, a way to get to peritoneal dialysis, whether they give it to you or not. And I've had patients who have gone around the obstructionist. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying there aren't. I'm just saying that you don't have to take their no for an answer. You can at least try. And it's the same with transplant programs. There are transplant programs that might not transplant you because they're not comfortable. That doesn't mean that other transplant programs couldn't do that. So I think that don't be afraid of getting a second opinion. Don't be afraid of asking around. Don't be afraid of going to the charge nurse and saying, I know you guys have a PD specialist somewhere. I want to talk to them. I'm interested. Yeah. And I will also tell you that there is incentive for the clinics to start doing better in terms of getting patients home. And so they should have those resources readily available. So, and then like you said, our clinic, North Texas Dialysis Access Clinic, if you ever have questions, all my patients know once we operate on them, they are family. If they have an issue, etc. If they don't like what they're hearing, they call our office, and then we'll call and say, what's going on? What's happening with my patient? And then we can have a discussion about what we can do. But overall, the clinics do want to help. You just might have one person in that clinic who's not very helpful, but that doesn't mean everybody in that clinic is going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is very true. Well, thank you all so much for those presentations and sharing those empowering and encouraging words for our patients. We do have our contact information up on the screen. So if anybody does have a question, I know we got some more questions in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email us so we can get you in contact with Dr. Gooden or Sam and Lacye so they can possibly be your peer mentors. And also feel free to give us a call if you do have any questions, like Dr. Gooden mentioned, because we're here to help out if you do run into staff that maybe aren't giving you the answers that you're quite looking for. So thank you all again for those amazing presentations. Thank you so much, Sam and Lacye and Dr. Gooden.
Thank you.
I hope
talking with you all.
Yes, it was wonderful talking and seeing you all as well. All right. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
All right.
Thank you.
You all.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you all.